Hi, I'm Supervisor Kathy Miller, and I'm here today with my over-the-fence neighbor and good friend, Jim Giles. Jim, thanks for being here with me today. You've been very involved from the beginning on researching and kind of exploring the idea of a parks district to deal with the ongoing deficit and to provide a permanent solution to the financial issues of Swenson Golf Course and Park. So tell us a little bit about what triggered your idea and your interest in a parks district. How did you get here?
Okay, I'm happy to tell you the background. I got interested in trying to look for solutions to the problem based on the outcome of the December 4th City Council meeting, where they talked about the potential to sell the property and develop it. And I live here. I live a few homes away from Swenson. I've been here in this home for 29 years. I've been a resident of Stockton for over 40 years. And I'm deeply concerned about what happens to this area. And so I began to look for solutions. And in doing that, I came across what other places in California have done, which is to create a special district called a Recreation and Parks District that becomes the funding source and perhaps a management source for recreation and park facilities within a boundary that's defined by the board of directors of the district. And I read more, I called people, I talked to people up in Sacramento who have districts, over in Livermore, who has a very large district in Livermore, does the same thing. And the more I learned, the clearer it became that this really provided a solution to the problems that the city sees and the problems that the residents in the area, the voters, everybody that lives here, the citizens. And on top of that, as I began to research, and something I really wasn't aware of, was that there's a great number of people in the relative boundaries near Swenson Park that are actually county residents, and they are not city residents. And I thought, well, that's unfair. People who are most affected should have a say in what happens. And so that again reinforced the idea that a park district would be a great thing to have and solve problems that people are looking for solutions for.
So you and I talked about this back in January,
Right.
Mainly because I'm the supervisor that represents these county residents in these pockets around Swenson Park. And at that time, I told you I was really excited about it, very supportive, and wanted to explore it. And when I asked you what could I do to support your efforts, you said, well, really, what you needed was a way to get connected into senior staff at the city manager, and also the elected officials, the mayor and the council members. And so you told me, well, that would be the most helpful thing you could do, is help get me in front of them, because your initial research was showing this would be best accomplished in a partnership with the city.
Right. And that really came about because I started this in December, shortly after the meeting, and by late December, I had reached the conclusion, and I reached out to the city to begin the process of getting information. How does that process work? I'm not in that business. I don't understand it, but
right.
I said, well, I got to figure it out. And so I was able to talk to Connie Cochran after a series of phone calls, and talked to Connie, who became very helpful. Very appreciative of what she's done to be able to provide a lot of information about what's going on. And so then I said, well, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to city council members. And I kind of ran into a problem, or not a wall, essentially, trying to get to meet with the relevant city council members. And I thought that you're a former city council member, you're a friend, and you're a supervisor, that you would be a great resource. So I came to you. But prior to that, I did meet with Dan Wright on January 8th at his open office hours.
Right.
And I described to him essentially the formation of the park district. And he was very supportive of the concept. And so I was encouraged by that, and so I continued to go. And then I said, well, I better talk to you before this gets too far out, and you could potentially help me, which you have been. You've been a great help. Thank you.
Well, it was a small thing for me to do, but I was very happy to do it. So let's talk a little bit about since you got plugged in and have been able to meet with the city elected officials. Where are you now? What's the status of your concept, and how have those meetings gone for you?
Well, the meetings have gone very well. I've been able to talk with Dan, as I said. I've met with Susan Lenz, talked with her. You were able to arrange for me to talk with Susan Loftus, who was a great help and I think very encouraging about getting the Park and Recreation District in place. I've met with Tom Patty, I've met with Tom Uslin to understand their concerns, or from a different angle.
From the Lincoln Unified School District.
And from Lincoln Unified
Yes.
School District specifically, what were they thinking? And Tom has been very encouraging about getting the district formed. He thinks it's a wonderful idea, and there may be opportunities where the district could cooperate with Lincoln Unified and perhaps have other facilities or other things that might be important for both parties. And so we've been working down that path. I want to make it clear that Tom hasn't said the school district can do anything. He's just interested in how this will work. There's been absolutely no commitments on their part, but everyone I talked to has been very interested about how this works and how do we get it done.
So let's talk just a little bit. Provide us with a few more details on when you talk about a recreation and parks district. Exactly what would the process look like to get one formed, and then where would we go from there?
Okay. First of all, the concept of recreation and park districts dates back to 1931, and when the legislature at that time first approved the creation of a recreation and park district concept, and it was modified in 1957, and then again in 2007, it was finally modified into what it is today, which is a codified process for creating special districts, and in particular the Recreation and Park District. The legislature has approved it as one of a few almost simplified process for creating special districts. I think you've been through that several times as we've talked.
I have been, and I actually managed the Downtown Stockton Alliance for almost 5 years, which is a property-based improvement district, which is a form of these special assessment district overlays.
Correct. And so with the background information about the legal parameters, it was pretty easy to then read through that and understand the steps that are necessary to get it to happen. And ultimately it has to go through the local area formation commission for approval, but essentially it's very straightforward on how it works. There's 3 methods essentially of creating a district. One is through a petition of voters, where 25% of the voters within a defined district, in this case it essentially surrounds Swenson Park, and that those voters signing a petition, if it's 25% or more, then that petition goes to LAFCO, and LAFCO then begins the process of getting the district established. It's very time consuming to do that.
I was just going to say, it sounds like that would take a lot of time and energy to collect all those signatures.
Well, that, and then the process behind it, because of the sequence of events that have to occur. And then the next 2 methods really involve either a county board of supervisors or a city council can do the same thing and create it rather expeditiously. In this case, Swenson lies within the city of Stockton boundaries.
And it is a city-owned asset.
It is a city-owned asset, yes. And so it would then fall essentially to the city to become the leader and the proponent of creating this special district, the park and recreation district.
So is it important then to work in partnership with the city if this is the most direct and cost-saving and effective way to do it? It would seems that it would be important to work in partnership with the city.
I think absolutely, and I've spent some time speaking and meeting with Mayor Tubbs as well as City Manager Kurt Wilson to understand and what they're looking for and understand how this could go through the city.
Mm-hmm.
And they've both been very helpful, and I think they're very supportive of the process. So the process now that the city is engaging in is through a golf committee that they formed, that Susan Loftus and Mayor Tubbs put together essentially to provide citizen input, which was a key part that was missing ahead of the
Yes.
December 4th meeting. And so I think it's good. I'm a member of that committee. There are a lot of very good people, and I am anxious for that to run its path. But ultimately, the outcome of that is an RFP to go back and potentially get others to come in and say that they would be interested in running the golf course. Kind of more of the same.
Right.
But I think some of the ideas would be beneficial for a district. So, and I'm working with Mayor Tubbs to get a parallel path going to create the district through the city efforts.
I think that's important
Yeah.
because the request for proposal process, as it applies to government, it's very time consuming, it's very lengthy, and there's a lot of legal prescriptions of the path that has to take. So I agree with you. I think if you're going to work parallel paths, it's important to sort of uncouple them and let them run independently.
Yeah, exactly, and not daisy chain.
Exactly.
Because one of the I think primary issues is that the people in the community around Swenson are looking for answers.
Yes.
And waiting a year or two for answers is really not being responsive to what the people
Yeah.
want.
It's a lot of uncertainty right
Yeah.
now, and I think
Yeah.
I think that's what people want to eliminate. They want some certainty about this.
Yeah.
And what appeals to me about this process is it removes it from politics, it removes it from dependency on the general fund, and it has the potential to provide its own revenue stream, which would essentially become a more permanent solution to this issue.
Yeah, the overriding principles are that the Swenson would remain in perpetuity as either a golf course or green space, and that it would be self-funding. The city has made it clear that they lack the funds to sustain supporting the golf courses. Van Buskirk is losing in excess of $500,000 a year, and Swenson costs are about $175,000. So it's very close to $700,000 a year in subsidies that are currently required. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the city needs to quickly consider and act on eliminating golf at Van Buskirk. And they have said that in a couple of documents.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think the basic concepts are there, but it's still a matter of funding. So if the city were to submit the RFP, it comes back and the time passes, there's still this question of funding. The city has said there's no money for capital improvements, and there's no money for sustaining ongoing costs that don't reflect utilization by the members of the city. And I don't know where the money would come from in this case. If you convert Van Buskirk to a recreation facility, which I think would be wonderful and very much needed within the city, it's going to have ongoing operating costs. The money has to come from somewhere. The same is true in Swenson. If you were to find somebody, you still run the risk of the city having to subsidize
Correct.
that. And then there's this big question about there is no money for capital improvements. And without capital improvements, you're essentially going to condemn Swenson to more difficult times in the future.
Right.
All of that can be prevented by the special park district.
So tell me a little bit in terms of district boundaries, a little bit more of the specifics of the district. What would this Swenson Recreation and Parks District, who would be in it, and what kind of special tax are we talking about?
So the district boundaries, as I envision it, and I'm just putting out my thoughts. The other people and members of the golf committee, lots of people are going to comment on this, but my initial thought is that the districts include the immediate area around Swenson, going. Let's start to the south. Let's go Pacific Avenue, from Swain Road. Go north, up to Lower Sacramento Road, where it intersects Mosier's Loop. Go to the west, up to Don Avenue. Don Avenue to Hammer Lane out to the landing.
Okay.
Then back over to 14 Mile Slough, or 5 Mile Slough.
5 miles
to the south, and then up to 14 Mile Slough, wrap around Lincoln Village West, and then come down essentially to Swain, following 14 Mile Slough to Swain and Pacific.
Okay.
And I picked that for two reasons. One, those people have the most direct access to Swenson, and there's roughly 8,000 people who live within those boundaries that are residents of the county. And I firmly believe that it's important that the people who are most affected in our government system have a say in what happens.
I agree with you on that, definitely. So there are other parks within those boundaries that you just described. Would those other parks then be part of what you envision in terms of receiving a higher level of service?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 3 parks total. There's Groupie Park,
which is in Lincoln Village West.
Which is in Lincoln Village West, and the city has designated that as a community park. There's the park at Swenson Golf Course that's designated as a regional park, principally because it lacks parking. And then there's Gibbons Park to the north, just over the edge of Hammer Lane.
Just to the north of Hammer, by Hammer and Alexandria.
Adjacent to the fire department.
Fire station,
Fire
yes.
stations is there. If you look at the city's document outlining areas of priority, you find pretty quickly that the area in northwest Stockton is at the bottom of the list of choices. And I know it's very difficult for the city with the funding issues that they've fought through and come out of, and I don't argue their choices, because you have to make choices.
Yes, you do.
But sadly, we don't have the money to pay for everything we want. And
it's very true.
So it's very unlikely, in my opinion, that the city is going to devote money to do the things that these parks need. We've talked briefly about the golf course at Swenson, but there's things the park needs. There's no parking at Swenson Park, essentially. It's all on the road, and there's no parking during the school day. So it undercuts, I think, the utilization of Swenson Park. Opening up the parking, spending a little capital money, creating better spaces, I think is a big item on the list of things to do. If you look at Groupie Park out in Lincoln Village West, you almost need a 4-wheel drive vehicle to get through the parking lot.
Yes.
It's been neglected for a long, long time. The facilities are there, but again, nobody's spending money on improving, maintaining, upgrading, doing the things that people who live in that area would like to see. So by including it, and including those capital projects and upgrading the entire level of maintenance of the facilities, I think would be a big winner for the people who use it more often, and as the city designated, it's a community park, so it really encompasses a lot of people.
Right. So is this just a way to let the city off the hook, or would the city continue to provide some level of service and commitment to these city-owned parks?
Well, the intent of the district would be to take over maintenance of the parks and to provide the capital to do projects that are approved by an elected board of directors within the district that are representative of what the people want to do. It's really a funding mechanism that takes it out of the city pockets. The city would remain providing police services, water, all of the other services to that community and to those parks as they do today. But the district would be responsible for maintenance and capital expenditures to satisfy what the people need. Say the same is true over here at Gibbons Park.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and so the process then in terms of applying this special tax, how much do you envision this kind of a special tax? I mean, how much would people be paying?
Well, my estimates are essentially to cover the potential cost of subsidies that Swenson experiences. I've looked at the numbers. I know other people are looking at the numbers. I think there's meat to trim there to break it in a better management and maybe a higher level of expectations would improve the financial condition, and really getting people to come out and play again would be wonderful, and it would help relieve the cost. But I think something in the $20 to $25 per parcel per year would be sufficient to do that, along with the city contributing what it's currently paying for maintenance from the city funds and allocate those over to the district. That's part of the laws that were established in 2007 by SB 707 to create this special district arrangement.
So no matter what the council decides to do, if they want to move forward with this, ultimately, before any of these special taxes would be applied to folks that live in these areas, there would need to be a vote of the people that would be paying the assessments, correct?
Exactly. And this gets back to the timing, really. So it is possible, I believe, having worked through the calendars and looked at the voting requirements and how to get this done, but I believe that there's a path that can get this on the ballot for November to pass the property tax within the proposed district and to create the district in that time through the city process.
And then, so this initial, let's round it, let's say $25 a year special tax that would pay for ongoing operations and maintenance. But then for the capital improvements that you're talking about doing, and we've talked a lot about things that were recommended way back in 2010 that the golf consultant felt could make Swenson competitive. How would those funds be generated to get to those capital improvements?
Well, those funds would be, or the projects, actually, back up further, the projects would be determined by the board of directors, as I said earlier, which are elected from within the district by the people living in the district. And they would decide what the timing is and what projects are high priority. So once the board decides that, then the board would then, through a mailed ballot arrangement to property owners, taxpayers, property tax payers within the district, would then ask for the funds necessary to amortize the bonds that would be taken out to pay for these capital improvements today, and stretched out over 20 or 30 years at a tax-free interest rate.
Right. So once the district is formed, is it in place in perpetuity, or does it have to be renewed periodically? How does that work?
No, the district would stay in place in perpetuity. So the overarching question then is, how does the district get control of the park so that the city, as things change and circumstances change, somebody doesn't come in and make a decision, well, we're going to get rid of it, which is absolutely what the voters are opposed to.
Correct.
So there are several processes to that, and it would be negotiated with the city, but one the city has previously considered would be to lease out the golf course. You could lease the golf course. The subject of the lease would state clearly that the park would remain as a golf course or green space in perpetuity for so long as the district remained in effect. And the only people who can dissolve the district are the voters.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of efforts by a group, first calling themselves Save Swenson and now Friends of Swenson, but your effort is separate from those groups, but you're working with them. Can Can you let people know a little bit how this all fits together?
How it all came to be. Well, as I said, I kind of formulated the concept of utilizing the Recreation and Parks District, which there's 120 plus of them in California, as a means of solving a problem. And that was in December. In January, I began meeting with people, including you and others, to kind of round things out, and then I started to look at how we're going to be able to put this together. And I met with Blair Hake in the middle of February and said, this is my concept. I think this achieves everybody's objectives, and he agreed. I attended one of their board meetings, and everybody was in agreement and thought this was a great idea. And I said, I'm going to continue to be championing this on my own, but I think we could work together as partners, and how do we get money, and how does this go forward. But I made it very clear that I am continuing to pursue this, and I'm going to pursue it through the city, because I think that's the most expeditious way. And timing, again, is another factor. The time to get petitions signed, the time to raise the money to pay the engineer, to do all the other steps that are necessary, is extensive. And there are other assessments that are coming about in 2019 for 5 Mile Slough, for sewer treatment facilities, for pipeline. All kinds of things are coming up on the calendar for 2019. I think it's important that this get out ahead of those things. And I do want to make it clear, I'm not opposed to what they're doing. They've essentially created Save Swenson as a political action committee, and they've created a foundation they're calling Friends of Stockton,
Friends of Swenson.
Friends of Swenson, to generate funding to either support the political action committee or to do other sort of political kinds of activities that they want to undertake.
So, what would the next steps be to move this forward? What has to happen for this to stay on a timeline and move forward?
Well, as I mentioned, the city has created this golf committee, which I'm a part of, and we're working through. We have another meeting coming up next week. But the steps that have to happen, I think, have to be parallel with that. That could be a very time-consuming process through the golf committee. But the city can act, the council can act to establish a hearing on 20 days' notice for other citizens and citizens within this area to go before the council and be supportive or to object, and the council would then make a decision at that time, presumably recognizing the value of all of these things by creating the district, to then pass a resolution of application to LAFCO to form the district. Once that process is in place, the city and the county can initially appoint board members who would then be elected from voters within the district. I want to make that clear. This entire thing, once it's created, is governed by this board of directors. It's out of the sphere of either the board of supervisors or the city council. And once they're in place, there can be an election in November to vote on the special tax to fund the district itself and get the ball rolling, and let's get this done, and work with the city to get the lease or whatever of the property.
Should have asked you to put your phone on silent.
I should have. It's late in Pennsylvania. So I think it's a timing question as much as anything, is to work in parallel. If for some reason this falls off the track, there's still what the golf course committee is doing. But I think the golf committee, after we have our meeting and I've explained in greater detail what's going on, I believe they'll come out and say, well, let's do that.
Let's do this. At least let's do this first.
Let's do this first, and we can work in the background on the other things.
Right. So, what would you like people to know? People that want to, that like what they're hearing here, and they think this is a process that sounds promising. What should they do? Should they contact their council representatives and say, we'd like you to hold a hearing? Would that be step one?
That would be helpful. I think any message that the voters can send to to the representatives, in this case the city council members, that they're in favor of that they think that's a great solution, and it solves the problems of fair representation, it solves the problem of lack of capital, it becomes funded by the people who benefit the most from within the district. And if they will say those things to the city council members, and there's an effort to get them to move forward quickly, that would be wonderful. Terrific.
Well, and speaking, I mean, I can only speak for myself because I'm only one of 5 supervisors, but from, putting on my county hat here, I can't imagine that if this is something that both the city and the county residents are petitioning in a public hearing for the city to pursue, I can't imagine that the county would oppose it, knowing that ultimately, before any kind of tax or assessment or anything else would be imposed on our county residents, they would have an opportunity to actually vote on whether or not they want to go ahead with that. I can't imagine that the county would oppose something like that. So I think this shows it has a lot of promise. I would just like to say, as a Parkwoods resident and somebody like you that loves this neighborhood and has lived here for a very long time, thank you for all of your hard work, for kind of putting yourself out there and doing this research and embarking on a process that you've never done before and meeting with all of these elected officials. I'm grateful to you as a neighbor and as a resident of the city of Stockton, and as somebody that cares very much about Swenson and what happens to it. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. It's in many ways it's a pleasure, but it's a passion as well. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
Mm-hmm.